Florence, Italy at the time was considered to be the capital culture of Europe and of the Italian Renaissance art movement. There were some characteristics which made that Renaissance art was a period of change for art in the world. Hi, this is Anita from 5 Minutes with Art. Today I want to talk a little bit about the Renaissance. And if you've been listening to any of my podcasts, you would know that I love the Renaissance. When many people think about the Renaissance, they think about it as just one period of art. But the truth is that the Renaissance was divided up into several different periods. And today I want to talk a little bit about the early Renaissance versus the high Renaissance, because really there is a division between the early and the high Renaissance in art. The early Renaissance was known to start from the early 1400s to about 1495. It flourished and it started in Florence, Italy. Florence, Italy at the time was considered to be the capital culture of Europe and of the Italian Renaissance art movement. There were some characteristics which made that Renaissance art was a period of change for art in the world. And one of it was that it focused on realism. The early Renaissance was when the artists started to focus on the realism in their art and in their paintings. The human ideal became very important to them. Things like the human form. It became very important for them to show that the form was actually anatomically correct. They also included new ideals at the time, which was things like self-reliance, civic virtue, along with the belief that the ordinary people were unique, they had dignity, and there was a value for human life, which hadn't been seen in Europe before. Naturalism in art was also very important. It became very important that the human figures were depicted, as I said before, like an anatomical realism, and that, nature was important, and looking to nature was important, and making it look as real as possible. There was also, during this time, was a fascination with Greek and Rome. The entire Renaissance era saw this renewal of this fascination with Greek and Rome antiquity. And what's very interesting too is that during this time, as Rome was expanding and they started, digging buildings, and they would maybe unearth a statue or there would be some type of Roman or Greek artifact would be unearthed. And so there was this real fascination with this that was happening during this time. Illusionist techniques were also implied. Art was no longer just 2D. Art became like 3D. There was dimension to it where you felt like you were walking into a painting, where you could see the depth of the room. You could see the depth of the painting. And the linear perspective was also very important. For Renaissance artists, it became very important for them to make sure that it was the mathematics and geometry was used and make sure that the linear perspective was correct. And color contrast also became very important. So all of these things actually were important throughout the entire Renaissance, but they started in the early Renaissance and they continued on into what became known as the High Renaissance. The High Renaissance is also a different type of art, and it's art that flourished for about 35 years, from about 1490s to about 1526. But the High Renaissance is unique because it really towered around three individuals or three artists that are kind of considered the trinity of the Renaissance artists. They were Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael. So when we talk about the High Renaissance, you really need to talk about those three artists. Because of them, the High Renaissance is important. Leonardo da Vinci, it was really considered to be the ultimate Renaissance man. He was a genius who spent his days in study of all these different types of things. He would study everything from medicine to science to inventions. He himself was known to dissect at least 30 different cadavers, and he would draw it and he'd write it down in his notebook. So he really produced very little art and was more of known to be a scientist, an architect, an inventor. Michelangelo, too, was a creative genius who was not afraid to take on vast projects. His statue from the David to the Sistine Chapel were really these huge projects that he took on, and he was not afraid to do it and to use his genius. Raphael was also considered to be an artistic genius, and he created works that were perfectly expressed the classical spirit of harmony, beauty, and the serene. So he really was another great artist. The tragic thing about Raphael, though, is that he died at a very young age. So I kind of feel like he never really quite was able to get to his full potential. And if maybe he wouldn't have died so young, we maybe would have seen more great works by Raphael. These three artists influenced the High Renaissance, and they became the central figures of the High Renaissance. And also during the High Renaissance, religious art became extremely important. That was because there were many religious commissions. So when you look at the Renaissance, you need to really look at these three artists and look at between the early Renaissance and this High Renaissance that towered around these three important men. If you're interested to learn more, we have a blog that we've written, which is called Early Renaissance versus High Renaissance, and we explain in there more and we show more of the art and some more of the details. This is Anita from 5 Minutes with Art. You hope you've enjoyed being with us for about 5 minutes to learn something new about art. And if you've enjoyed our podcast, please do subscribe to it. We'd love to have you be part of our community. And tell our friends about us. If you have any comments or questions, we'd love to hear from you.